there are areas where science doesn't have an answer. Some people say, oh, only what you feel is important. Others say, no, what you can think is important. No, it's the combination of the two. I can do a long answer and a short. The short is yes. Yeah, it is about that. You know, one of the interesting things for me is always, how are you defining yourself? In this world, you need to have some kind of a label, because otherwise people don't know who you are, what you're doing, and that kind of things. And one of the things that I've learned over time is I was attached to labels. Yeah. If I could not put a label on, then, how would people see me? How would people define me? And I see people do that. But science, yes. So according to my parents, from the moment I was born, I was a scientist. So you see, I was a scientist. And at that moment, and I put a label on myself as if that is who I am. But it is an important aspect of who I am. And I was passionate about it. At the same time, there was a heck of a lot of frustration with science. One of the things that was so strange for me is I'm an idealist in some way, so for me science was something like a pure thing, that is about information and helping people to understand how things are, not how we think they are, but finding the right definition to help people to understand. This is how the world works. And when I was in science, I realized pretty quickly that that's not how scientists always work. And that was maybe my first big disappointment. That people were, in a sense, you say, I'm a very, very, very good scientist, but I've also seen manipulations, I've seen the politics, I see how finances are influencing what people do and what they publish and what they don't publish. So the purity that I was hoping to find in doing scientific work, well, that was gone after about 5-6 years. And that was the second point. So the first point was my disappointment. It was not as pure as I thought. The second one was, wow, there are areas where science doesn't have an answer. The very first question for me was, what is life force? And can you define life force? Can you measure life force? No, you can't measure life force. But nonetheless, we accept that it is. But according to science, what you cannot prove doesn't exist. So are we now suddenly saying that life force doesn't exist? Well, that is not happening. So that was one of the other things that began to pop up stronger and stronger. Hey, there are not areas where we are not looking at. The same thing is the word consciousness. And now it's beginning to change, but at that time, no. Your conscious system is not supposed to influence what you're doing and how you're thinking. Well, now we know that, every thought is influencing your scientific outcome. So your belief structure is influencing what is happening. But at that time, nobody was talking about that. This quantum physics has brought that in, the observer effect, and now there's all these question marks, and how much do we really influence the outcome of our experiments or observations or whatnot. So that was the second round, was okay, there's areas that didn't fit really in. And in the 70s, this whole spiritual movement began to really awaken. It was in the 60s it started, but it became much bigger in the 70s. So once I dived into that one, it's like, wait, there are more things that science can't give answers to. And that is where the tension fields began to come up. What am I now doing? Am I continue to put these blinders on and become myopic and say, oh, this is still my whole future science? Or do I expand? Well, to be honest, initially there was no way I could combine those two. There was no space. I was at that time teaching at the university, ecology and systematics. I love systematics, What is this who did that, going to all these tiny little details. I loved it. But at the same time, it was beginning to slowly realizing, no, this is not ultimately what I feel my life should be. But I had nothing else to fill it in with. So what do you then put in, and how do you combine it? Because when I was doing something different than I was supposed to do at the university, then I already was saying, hey, that's not how we do things. I believe that what you need to do is to train biologists that are independent thinkers. And this one day I realized I need to do something different, but I didn't know how. Until, there's always that moment that is what I call a big shift in your life. Well, in my life it was the death of my first wife. It's like this sudden end of a period in your life that is, and I was pretty young, I was 47 when it happened. And it was like, okay, here I am. Can I continue in the same way? Well, the same way was not existing anymore, so something needed to shift and change. And she died from cancer, and I was actually so frustrated that there was actually no good solution for that. That I decided I need to find a way that if I see other people going through it, that I can, from a scientific point, it was my first thought still, can say something about it. And, of course, science didn't have all the answers. In that period after that, I was one day seeing an advertisement for a psychic fair. And I'm like, okay, do I really want to go there? But I decided to go and went to a reader. I was listening to it, like, okay. Went to another one, listened to it, like, okay. And then I saw a line of people standing there. And I said, what are these people lining up for? Then I went to these brochures, and it was about Reiki. And I'm like, oh, that is interesting. I'm not waiting for this. I'm going to sign up. And I spontaneously signed up. And the next weekend, I was doing my first course. Whoa, was that an eye-opener for me. Because suddenly there were people that were thinking differently and doing things differently. And I got very excited. I bought a table and a mattress and a pillow. And everybody who was willing, I was going and I was doing healing and sitting there and getting utterly bored. Position here, position there. I couldn't do that. So my question is, what am I doing when I do this? And now you see the combination coming in. Yeah. So here I'm doing something that is, well, there's no scientific explanation what exactly is happening. We say, energy is flowing. Energy is flowing. What does that mean? Energy is flowing. And what kind of energy are you talking about? And where does it come from? So my scientific mind made overtime when I was sitting there being bored because you'd have to do something. And then I realized after a couple of months, okay, if I seriously want to explore this, I need to have a different approach. And the question is, what do I feel when I'm sitting there? You see? So my scientific frame of mind start asking questions and questions and questions and questions. And I'm so grateful that I have that aspect, because that aspect of asking questions is for me the key. I don't take anything on face value. People can tell me, oh, it is this way. It's like, oh, that's interesting, Let me explore from my perspective whether I have a resonance with what you're saying. So, well, you may understand that letting go of the scientific way of thinking to enough degree that the feelings and the emotions that are connected with that could come in, and that I gave them the same value. Because that is a key point for me. You can say, some people say, oh, only what you feel is important. Others says, no, what you can think is important. No, it's the combination of the two. Yeah? And then you can call that an integration of science and spirituality, because spirituality is nowadays defined as, being, let's say, non-physical. Yeah. So spiritual is actually a pretty interesting term, to be honest with you, because there's so many different interpretations of that. So I ultimately, to also honor my background, I moved to the term metaphysics. Yeah, and that covers actually that. I can almost say the need to combine those two. For me, the spirituality. So you can say spirituality is knowing that our consciousness is the key to everything. Spirituality also means for me that you take into account all that is not visible. Yeah. So the whole non-visible world. Yeah. So you can call that the energy world. Yeah. And it is also understanding that we are, not only that physical, but also that spiritual being. And then what you do in studying the world is actually understanding how that works inside of you. Because we are that unique combination of a physical being that is based and formed to a large degree, there are all kinds of little tricks around it, but to a large degree through evolution, so that this body can function within the context of the evolution system of Mother Earth. But at the same time, we are spiritual beings that use this, you can say body, to experience, I would say, a very unique system that we call the Earth system. Yeah. And that is the beauty. I can both enjoy so much that physical, that tangible thing, the beauty of the flowers, of the birds, and all that kind of thing, versus the beauty of the dynamic of all those energy systems, and how all of that, you can say, reach out into a very unique system. Yeah? A system where we have physicality, and you can call that the manifestation, but it is coming into this manifestation thanks to consciousness that works through information fields. Yeah, we call that nowadays more for genetic fields, right? So those aspects, those three dynamics, need to be guided by one major thing, and that's love. Yeah, and then you can create harmony in everything. So you see, the physicality is science. Yeah, there's the measurement, the definition. The consciousness is spirituality. But you see that the consciousness is inducing fields, and that is the energetic system that is in between spirituality and the manifestation of it. But we need to understand all three. And the only way to do that is to let go of basically what we have learned to believe. Yeah, I cannot do anything else anymore than seeing that integration of the two. There is no separation. So, what do you call it? Science. People ask me now, who are you? What do you? How would you describe yourself? How do I describe myself? I would describe myself as a spiritual being that has this beautiful experience through this physical system that's called Jaap. Yeah? And I have all kinds of beautiful, let's say, possibilities to study all kinds of elements, but it doesn't define me. What defines me is how I express that unique combination of spiritual being and a physical being. My upbringing. Let me begin with saying that I have some very sweet parents. Very dedicated. I was brought up Catholic. And I think that maybe I should start earlier. I was born in the Second World War. And my father was in the military, so after the Second World War, he went back into that. And he was placed in the middle of at that time still pretty large area of forest in the Netherlands, which is rather unique because the Netherlands is a pretty developed country, one of the highest density populated countries in the world. So when I was 2.5, I think, something like that, we moved there, almost 3. And there was no school because it was too far away, the village was too far away. And at that time, my parents had no car, there was no such a thing as a driving on a bicycle, bringing me to school. So I was there every day in the forest, playing the forest, the plants, the insects, and that was my life. Yeah. So up until 5.5 years, and then my father was placed into a city. And so I was literally pulled out of what for me was the world that I loved, that gave me, you can say, everything that I loved and longed for. And it was even so strong that when we had visitors and they walked with me in the forest, so I realized they're all trees, we have no hills or nothing there. So how do you find your way? So people lost their way very quickly. And so they asked, and certainly my mother asked, how can you find your way back? So that was 4 years. I never got lost. And I was telling my mother, that's what she told me. And I said, no, well, the little beings and the trees tell me. So my mother thought that I was fantasizing. You know, oh, he's pulling that. Already now he starts to be a fantastic, all kinds of imagination, And that was their idea of looking at the whole thing. But for me, that was real. And when I was 5.5 and went to that big city, I had to go to school. And of course, I went to a Catholic school. And it was run by nuns. So I couldn't remember it, but I went into a regression because there was some trauma there. And so that's why I went into the regression. So that's how I remember it. So the nun was talking about God and other things. And I was listening to that, and I said to her, well, that's not how it is. And I was severely punished for that. So I had to sit on my knees in the corner, and all the time she was telling me how bad I was, and all these children were looking at me, oh, this is a very bad boy. So you may understand that it's a big trauma. Yeah. And when I came home, crying, I was expecting that my parents would support me. But what did my father say? No, you should have listened to the nun. Yes, sir. And that was for me truly a trauma. And the trauma led to two things. In the first place, that I didn't trust any authority. And the second one was that I hated the Catholic system after that. Yeah. Of course, it's a reaction, because the system is what the system is what the people make of it. But for me, as this little boy, that wasn't. So when I was supposed to be an altar boy, of course, I refused. And now, you begin to understand the trauma that came from that. And the wrestling I had my whole life. So as soon as I left home, and that was when I was 18, I could leave home, and I was out and went into the military, because I had to in those days. So I never went back to that. But there's always like a longing to go back to what I was doing as a little boy. And that came back when I was ultimately, So at first the science was seemingly giving me the answer until I finally realized, no. I have to go back to the trees. I have to hug a tree again. Yeah? Because the trees are literally guiding me. You can communicate with the tree. Yeah? In the same way as there are all these beings that we call invisible beings, and we can reconnect with them. And whether you call them devas, I don't care how you call them. There are astral beings that are very sweet. Some of them are less, but there are many beings that are not visible, that all are part and parcel of this world. Yeah? And that, for me, is maybe the most important thing, to have brought that back as part. And that is that metaphysics, that non-visible part, what I call the energetic elements. And there are at least more beings there, I think, than there are even in the physical reality. Yeah, and we forgot about them. We begin to discover it. Fortunately, an increasing number of people can do that. But it's also the risky area, because we have no reference system for it. So, you see all kinds of deformations also in that one. And that's why I think it's so important that we share. That we share, begin to communicate. The 3 C's. The 3 C's is to connect. And from that connection, the next step is to communicate. And when you can communicate, you can learn to collaborate. Yeah? So we are in a phase where we begin to connect and begin to learn to communicate. Yeah? And then that will, and to my opinion, has to lead to collaboration. We need to learn to collaborate with every being that lives on this planet, because the fact that every being exists means it's an integrated part of it. And that means that we all are contributing to the totality of Mother Earth. So also, evolution will not take place without all that exists. That is one of those strange illusions. One of the things that people are thinking that we are on the top of it. We are a part of it. We are not at the top. Yeah, if you say evolutionary, you can say we went through all those different steps, and we are, without going into details, but there are all kinds of steps in that evolution based on morphogenetic fields. In this moment we are, you can say, the highest field. But there is another field that is coming. And what is something that people tend to forget is that the only way we can exist is because all the other systems have developed. So one is not more important than the other, they're all needed. Some people can't believe when I tell them, we are still, in a sense, depending on the very first step of the evolution, which are the bacteria. Without bacteria, we are non-functional. There are more bacteria than cells in our body. It's more bacterial DNA and virus DNA than we have our own DNA. So, if we really allow that to sink in, and then we begin to understand that evolution means that everything is an integrated part, and in a sense is depending on each other. Yeah. And, well, how many people can communicate with their bacteria? Well, I wrestle with it, to be honest. I'm all the time thinking, okay, what do you tell me? And then they tell me something I don't want to hear. I was like, oh, no, I think I've heard wrong. That's my little cheat to myself. Anyway, it is possible to communicate with them, and that is something we need to learn again. So that is why I say the first thing is to connect, then to communicate, and then we can collaborate, because then we can go to the most optimal health. Yeah, and those bacteria are not only, let's say, extracellular, but they're also intracellular, and then we call them mitochondria, which are providing us with all the energy that we need. So, would we live without them? No. Will we live without the food of the plants? No. Without the trees and the plants, you know the story. So it is that realization that is in the daily life for most people non-existing, even though they are continuously depending on that one. So it is communication. When I talk about the three C's, we are not talking about only the visible, but also with the invisible world. Yeah. People say it's easier to communicate with the visible world. And I say, okay, so you know exactly what that plant on that table is telling you. Whether you give it exactly the amount of water that it wants, does it have exactly the amount of light? We cannot communicate with that on that level. And in theory, we can. Practically, we are wrestling it because we have never been trained into it. And my feeling is that one of the most important things that people who are going beyond the traditional can contribute is the realization that there is more. Yeah, I think it's one of the things that I like so much, the work that Melody is doing with light technology, because it allows to bring in information that is not standard. Yeah, and it is not about whether it's true or not true, right or not right. It's totally irrelevant. It is that invitation to look beyond. To wake up and say, hey, no, it's not only limited to this, not limited to that. Yeah, the term came up. Let's start when the term was invented. It was actually in 1999. And I was sitting with two friends and we were talking about, okay, well, let's sit and meditate together, because we were all three searching of what is it that really is our passion. What would you want to do with your life? Yeah. And yes, I was excited about this and excited about that. That was not the point. But what is important was, okay, what is it that you would like to do with for the rest of your life, so to speak? So when we were sitting there and meditating, like, oh, what a question, oh my goodness, And I said, if you're in this what a question and you're thinking in your mind, you don't get your answer. So I said, okay. And And I was thinking into it, and suddenly I was like, metaphysical ecology. Metaphysical ecology? And what is that? Where did that come from? It literally popped up in my mind. And then I was thinking about it, yes. My work in Kenya was as an ecologist. I was teaching ecology and systematics. So, ecology was a passion, because that looks not at all those minute details. It looks at the interaction between systems. And that was what I was so excited about. I love systems and how they interact with each other. So, that makes sense. But then metaphysical. Okay. I was at that time studying already earth energies, running around with my dowsing rod and feeling, meditating on the different places. And I was like, well, that's actually what it is. Ecology, where we add all the invisible stuff. All the beings, because, and let me go back to what I said earlier, only when we see the whole, sense the whole, this means visible and invisible beings, only then can we understand ecology, means the knowledge of our home, the planet, Mother Earth. And I was like, well, that's it. That's it. Yes, that is my passion. So at that moment I had it. Okay, how do you fill that in? Well, it was a little bit more direct than what I did before. So before that I was mostly into the crystal skulls, because for whatever reason, I was guided to start there. And in doing dowsing work, I did a lot of dowsing with people in the Netherlands initially, and in the crop circles and all that kind of things. And I was so excited about it, because one of the things that I realized, that although you can cheat yourself all the time with dowsing, I'm very aware of that. At the same time, it allowed me to find lines that, just only with your eyes closed and feeling, where are they? Well, that was not that easy. So it was a very good system, even although the interpretation is a different story. But it made that I started with this whole concept of metaphysical ecology in that moment, because it helped me suddenly to organize all the different elements that I was passionate about. There was something like an umbrella where I could place things under, and since as an ecologist I understand the basic principles, it was like, I just add things to it, and I can use that what I've been learning over all those years now in a positive way and in a larger context. So that's how the term came. And that means that I needed to understand the basic energy of Mother Earth, because we fit into these energy systems of the Earth. People do not realize that we walk continuously through a sea of energies. And we are so used to it that we hardly can differentiate. There are some people that can. They feel, this feels more comfortable. That feels less comfortable. Yes, also when you step into a house or a home, people feel certain things, So all of that is basically happening. But to really become aware what is there and how it can support us in optimally functioning, but not only support us, support the plants, the animals, all systems. Because we are all depending on those energies. We grew up, evolution took place in the energetic setting of Mother Earth. And then you go from that, you come automatically. And what is Mother Earth? Well, basically, it's a being, a conscious being that is crystalline in nature. So, and then I suddenly started understanding, that's why I had to go to crystal skulls, to connect more with the crystal energies. And now I understand why I had to look at all those different type of crystals. Because they're all energies of Mother Earth. In addition to all the energy, so grid systems and stuff that's there is also all those rocks and all those crystals that co-create that environment where life has evolved in. And then you look one step farther, and you're like, well, wait a minute. All those other planets in this solar system, they're also crystalline in nature. Wait a minute. And what about all the other suns and stars and planets that are out there? All crystalline in nature. And that is why I came with the title that under which I write articles for the Sedona Journal of Emergence, and that is the crystalline universe. It is that expansion from starting with these crystal skulls. That crystal is such an important part of beginning to understand the energies of Mother Earth that you then can expand and realize, but actually all those crystalline systems that we call planets have an energy field and are connected with each other in an unbelievable network. So you see, networks exist within our system, within the Earth, within the solar system, within the galaxy, and so on and so forth. So suddenly, metaphysical ecology is not only the Earth, it's also understanding the place of the Earth in the whole. When I sometimes sit up in a new grid system, like, oh, another grid system, or I meet other beings, are there still more beings? That is a bit overwhelming. And say, wow, how can I ever get a good understanding of this very complex, big system? And then I go back. Wait a minute, Jaap, you don't have to do it all. It is about the main things. I didn't know anything about crystal skulls in, 94, when I came on my first visit to Sedona. And I had a passion for crystals by that time. Yeah. So when I started my journey of more spiritual, I started also to feel into crystals. So I was getting increasingly excited, like, wow, I can feel this, I can feel that. It's that learning to give value to what you feel. That happened with crystals. But this one, if you sit with it and you begin to get the feeling of it, at a certain moment, okay, there's more to it than just a nice form or whatever. And it was that aspect for me that brought me to Sedona. We were looking at all kinds of different things. And I was, in that time, also in Native American tradition stuff. So, for whatever reason, do you know the kind of obsessions that you want a certain book and you don't know why? Well, I had that obsession. It was a channel book, and there were 3 parts, and I had only 2, and I needed to have the third one. And I gave up. I went to every bookstore in Sedona and an environment, and then somebody said, oh, I know a person who has that book. And so we called this woman, and she said, you can come over, I have it. So we went there, and her whole house and home was full with crystals. And I was like, so you like crystals, she said to me. And I said, yeah. And then she said, sit down, close your eyes. And she gave me something very cold in my hand, and I started crying and crying. I've been sobbing for half an hour. I had no idea what I had in my hands. And then finally I opened and I see this ugly thing, a crystal skull. I'm like, how can a grown-up guy bawling because of this stupid thing that I hold in my hand? So, yeah, well, you're a scientist or not, so I need to figure it out. And I realized I need to look deeper. And then you come to the same as with crystals, it has energy. Now and that is how I started. What are crystal skulls really showing, and what is different from an energy point of view? The key is the energies. So when I learned to not only feel but also see some of the energies, what I saw is that if you compare a quartz skull with a quartz crystal, that skull has, it's very difficult to explain, but there is like layers of energy. The energy, when you go, let's say this is the crystal skull like this, and then you have a first layer, it's like a peak, and then a down, and a peak, and a down, and a peak, and a down, and a peak. And it goes on and on. So there's like layers. And the more you activate it, the more of those layers begin to appear. So you can literally sense, or if you can't sense it or see it, then you can then learn to dowse it, how many of those layers are there. And what I learned is that when you focus on it and activate, as I call that, by your attention, more of those layers begin to appear. So there was a relationship between the way you were connecting, we come to the first C, right? And that connection apparently did something with the crystal. So studying that element, made that suddenly the crystal skulls went out of that idea of I have the oldest and the biggest and whatever, or that's not what they are about. And since they are quartz holds a lot of information, it is obviously that it has something to do with information. Now, why would you carve a skull? Well, it's like an invitation to process information. So they were actually simply saying, time to learn to connect with us. We hold information, and it's time that you get off your limited way of approaching life and see whether you get that information out of the skulls. And that is where the journey of crystal skulls started. But then I realized, but wait a minute, but there's also a piece of Mother Earth. So here we have a piece of Mother Earth. We heard from carvers that when you carve the eye sockets into the rough shape, that the energy shifts. So I wanted to see that process, and yes, as soon as the eye sockets are, then those layers that I'm talking about get something like a double vibration. So you add something. What you add is the intention to create a skull, which means it's a subfield of the crystalline field and has different qualities as a consequence. And that is why they are so fascinating. That's why you can go deeper into that studying and understand that it's all about, again, consciousness versus, that what you have already as a vibrational system that can help you then to evolve. Because that is then the next step. When you are, let's say, the best way to describe it is like an up and down thing. So you, in a moment of meditation, you're able to expand the potential of that skull or the crystal. It's the same story. And you cannot maintain that. So you go, I achieved something, in this moment. And then there is that moment that you are actually not able to reach it, but it has built up because every time you meditate with it, you raise your vibration. At a certain moment, you can go to the next step. And so that skull or crystals hold that energy. Now and then you have to catch up a little bit again, right? And then you move to the next level. So that's how you grow and expand. But in our time, everything needs to be done immediately, quick, fast. No, this takes time. So how willing are you to train yourself? I found it so fascinating that in the world that's more spiritual, everything needs to be in an instant. Well, nobody has difficulty in understanding that if you want to run the marathon, you have trained for many, many years. That is normal, but as soon as it comes to spirituality, you might not even have scratched the surface, right? So I think what we need to learn is to go back to understanding that the fast-paced world that we have created now is not the world that gives you the answers when you want to go on your spiritual path.